How's it going, everybody? I would like to wish everybody thank everybody, I should say, for their continued support regarding all of the recent stuff that has been going on the channel with Rikers Island training and things like that. So I wanted to put together a follow-up video to my Building a Service Provider Lab, and I actually had a lot of good feedback on it. And um, one of the things that I did get feedback on was how do you pull off the layer 2 VPN aspect of things. And it's actually a really good call out because one thing that you can do with other platforms, like there's UNL, Unified Networking Lab, there's EVE, I don't know exactly what that stands for off the top of my head, but Evolve something virtual environment, I think, something like that. But what you can do with these, one of the things you have to understand is the logic of building out the layer 2 infrastructure. Now, layer 3, which is what you've seen myself and many other vendors leverage, is the ability of using ESXi and the vSwitch or GNS3, plugging a bunch of laying a bunch of routers out there, connecting all the routers to a common switch. You're basically doing the same thing, or router, physical routers connected to a single switch, and all the interfaces are trunk links. At the end of the day, you're facilitating intercommunication through basically router on a stick. That works out quite well for the most part. The one thing that you'll find with layer 2 VPN is that logical configuration, it needs to change up a little bit. You can still leverage the .1q trunking aspect of things, but other aspects of it, like how do you get the configuration to work? What is I don't want to have a layer 2 loop and things like that. How do you get that aspect of things to work? And that's one of the things that I find a lot of people are having a hard time with is the mapping, and people look at the topologies that I put out there, and they're like, how are you doing this? And it's not rocket science. What I wanted to do was go over a real basic example of how I get it to work. So let me go over here to the configuration here, and let me come drop down to the bottom where we are. I've got this section right up here. This vSwitch 12 right here. This happens to be my CCIE service provider lab, where I've got 26 devices connected to this vSwitch. Now, this is for layer 3 connectivity, okay? And the way that I'm able to pull this off is, like I mentioned, you take a bunch of individual routers and you connect a single interface to a vSwitch, and then you use .1q trunks and .1q sub interfaces in order to facilitate communication between the routers. That's basically what you're doing. So as long as you've got that piece in play, you're good to go. Layer 2 VPN is a little bit different. And the reason why it's different is because of the fact that layer 2 VPN, you're using the provider network as the switch. So let's break this out for a minute and break down exactly how this works. Let me go ahead and grab my pen pad and explain how this conceptually works. So normally, if I'm going to have a router, I have our R1 connects to R2, connects to R3. I could wire them up like this and have them physically wired together. I could connect them to a common switch, and you could use, .1q 12 here, and these guys could talk to each other, and then you would do 23, and then .23. This could be fast 0/1 up here, and fast 0/0 up here. Whether you're doing directly connected on these guys, or if you're using logical connection here and a logical connection here, they conceptually do the same thing. Where layer 2 VPN comes into play, and this would facilitate you being able to support IGP, BGP, MPLS, layer 3 VPN, multicast, DMVPN, any layer 3 connectivity, even VXLAN. I could do, as long as R1 would have IP reachability to R3, you could do a VXLAN overlay to R3. I mean, that's supported as well. OTV would work the same way. where both OTV and VXLAN are essentially layer 2 over layer 3. So I would have a layer 2 broadcast domain back here, and then I would use, I would basically hide all of this, the R1 through R3, all this connection in between it would simply be transparent. It wouldn't see it. It'd be like a big switch. Well, the idea with layer 2 VPN, just like a router 1 and router 2, there's this guy is acting like a switch right here in the middle between R1 and R2. Well, what you're doing here is, let's say for instance I've got a situation where I've got R1 connects to R2 that connects to R3, and I've got R4 over here, and I've got R5 over here, and then I've got R6, etc. Well, what I could do is let's just draw R7 for simplicity, and I've got all these guys connected to each other. Well, this guy right here and here would be vSwitch 1, this would be vSwitch 1, and then what I would do is this connection here would be vSwitch 2, this would be vSwitch 3, this up here would be vSwitch 4, this would be vSwitch 5. Now, where this comes into play is these connections here would be layer 2 adjacent, this would be layer 2 adjacent, this would be layer 2 adjacent, and this would be layer 2 adjacent. What you would end up doing is you would create a new vSwitch and put, say for instance here on R1 you put gig 1 would be the layer 3 connectivity, so this is all layer 3 here. And then on this guy here you put gig 2 here, and you put gig 3 here. This would be gig 2, or it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be the same port. So you could put, say, gig 2 here, you could put gig 3 on R7. The same thing over here. This could be gig 2, this could be gig 3 for all. It really doesn't matter what you use. I typically like to keep the same interface number, so if I'm going to be using gig 2 on R1, I'm going to be using gig 2 on the remote router. And then once you've got this in play, you've got the layer 2 switch between the two. As long as you've allowed all the VLANs you need to be able to come across, you're in good shape. Then you can mess around with the different aspects of, well, I've got traffic coming in as this particular value here, I've got traffic going out as that particular value over there. It allows you to bridge the connections together. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. If you click on R1, and I click on Edit Settings, and I bring this guy over here, click on this guy right here, VM Network 2. This is my layer 3 connection port. This allows me to have communication between all my devices on layer 3. If I pull up Secure CRT, go ahead and just clear out the screen real quick. If I bring up Secure CRT and I look at this from the prospect of R1, I do a show IP interface brief, pipe exclude UNA. What I get is I have gig 1 here. These guys right here are all situated. And I have these guys, this is layer 3 connectivity. Now if I go up here and I type this in, show IP interface brief, if I look at gig 2 has been enabled, it's no shut. And what ends up happening here is this becomes my layer 2 VPN port. So I look here, I've got R1 and R11. I created a vSwitch. I named the port group R1, R11, and I place gig 2 of R1 and gig 2 of R11 inside of the network label R1, R11. Same thing on here on 11. I've got R1, R11. They're connected to each other. And then I go to over here to the vSwitch, and I simply scroll down until I find R1, R11, which is right here. So vSwitch 8 is configured as that. I put an interface of R1 and R11 inside of vSwitch 8, which is named R1, R11. The port group name is more important than the vSwitch itself. And then once I've done that, I can go ahead and map them to each other. So I've done, I'll go over and show you a quick topology here. So what I've done, let me pull some of this back here so it's easier for you guys to read. If you look here, the way that I've got this all situated is I've got gig 1 for all the iOS boxes is, layer 3 connectivity. What I do is on where it makes sense, obviously, I'll have gig 2, and gig 2 and gig 3 will be layer 2 connectivity. The iOS XR devices, they will support layer 2 VPN as long as they're somewhere in the data plane. And that if they are terminating a layer 2 VPN, they will not be supported. I can't go to XR3 and configure a pseudowire or a VPLS or PBB EVPN on XR3 and then have data plane communication between customer 1 site 3 and customer 1 site 2. That will not work because on the layer 2 VPN, the control plane will form, but the data plane will not terminate on the router. But I could run connections through XR2 because at that point, you are label switching the traffic, and label switching is supported. Layer 2 VPN data plane traffic is not supported. So there's a little bit of a caveat there. So I would never, you may be tested on this. When it comes to the CCA lab, they might say, well, configure layer 2 VPN in a point to multi-point configuration, so like an E-tree solution on XR3, but they're looking to see if you know how to terminate it and if the correct, and just make sure that the adjacency comes up. So, for instance, does VPLS work? Do you see the interface show up? Things like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. So let me go ahead and pull up Secure CRT again. And what I'll do is I'll show you customer 1 is R1, or R11, excuse me. And here on R1, if you look here, I got gig 2 is set up. If we do a show run interface gig 2, I have a service instance created, service instance 123 Ethernet, and I specify encapsulation.1q 1123. By doing that, I have now enabled what they call Ethernet flow point. I have decoupled the encapsulation mapping the encapsulation to a .1q subinterface on gig 2, and what I've done is I'm leveraging the service instance framework, the logical construct of the Ethernet flow point configuration. That is what's multiplexing gig 2, where now I can have gig 2 scale to as many customers as I want, and then on the main interface I can still do other things with that. So I can use a service instance to multiplex this particular interface and allow it to scale as much as I want, where if I was doing this with .1q, I'd be limited to 4096. I would only be able to do that many interfaces. Logically, it probably wouldn't work out because I'd run out of memory, but I wouldn't be able to scale it. So now I can scale this as much as I would like with the service instance. And then what I do is I type in the show run in section L2 VPN, and I specify the bridge domain. And what you get is underneath the layer 2 VPN, I get, you can disregard the XConnect because that's a different situation. I have the layer 2 VPN VFI context. I specify the VPN ID 123, and then I named it VPLS. Then underneath the bridge domain, I created bridge domain 123, and I mapped the member. I brought the VPLS as a member, which is basically bundling the pseudo wires together. So basically, they're acting as port channels across the back plane. So from R1 to R4 and from R1 to R5, and then I'm mapping the gig 2 service instance 123 to the bridge domain. So that's basically how I'm facilitating this communication. And if I do a show bridge domain, I have multiple connections here. And the way I'm actually doing this is these two right here are remotely connected. And then this guy here right here is my EFP, or my Ethernet flow point on the main interface on R2 R1, and I'm connected to R11. Now, because I've got this configured here, this is my logical construct under gig 2 that's allowing traffic that comes in from R11 that's encapsulated with VLAN 1123, I'm now able to communicate with customer 1 site 2, customer 1 site 3, and get the communication up and running. So if I go to R11 and I do a show IP interface brief, under gig 2, the interface is shut, and I've got a .1q subinterface underneath gig 2 1123. So if I do a show run interface gig 2.1123, I have just an encapsulation .1q 1123, and then I gave it an IP address. If I do a show IP EIGRP neighbors, I have 2 peerings underneath this setup here, and it allows me to communicate via EIGRP over VPLS. So I've got a connection to R2, which is customer 1 site 2, and I've got one going to customer 2 site 3. Don't let the numbering of the router fool you or mislead you. It's just I'm testing something. And if I was going to do this layer, that's more of a layer 3 VPN thing, but that's basically how I've got this operating. So if I do a show IP route EIGRP, I have a connection. I'm learning a route over this multi-point to multi-point configuration from, and this one here, in this particular case, I'm learning this from 123.0.0.12, which tells me I'm learning this from R12. If I was to go show IP interface brief and say config T, let's go do a show run section EIGRP, and I am, okay, so I've got to go and let me advertise router EIGRP 123 and network of 192.168.100.0. Now I go to CSR, in this particular case, router 12, show IP EIGRP, or show route EIGRP. You'll see that I just learned in the 192.168 network. So let's say I go back to R11 and I type in no on this guy. So I don't want to be advertising the loopback. I just want to be advertising a prefix. So I go back to 12, I hit the up arrow, and now I'm just learning the 100 network. If I go to 13 and I do a show IP route EIGRP, I'm learning the 101. So if I do a show IP interface brief, let's say I go to interface loopback 102, IP address, loopback, yeah, that's fine. IP address of 192.168.102.13/24, router EIGRP 123, and network of 192.168.102.0. I go to router 11, I do a do show IP route EIGRP. I get these routes in here. So now I'm learning all these connections over that. So this allows you to scale it out. Now I'm using a router to terminate my layer 2 circuit. So now if I was to come down here and do a trace route to 192.168.102.13, sourcing from, say, loopback 100, which I believe is what I've got it configured as. Loopback, yeah, loopback 100. Loopback 100? Yes. I go directly to R13. And the reason why it knows to take me that path is because I have learned it via that MAC address. If I do a show ARP, I know that if I do a show IP route for 192.168.102.0, I learned that from gig 2 1123, right? With this hop IP address. If I do a show ARP, I know to get to this guy here, this is my next hop IP address, use this MAC address to get there. So then if I go to R1 and I look at this MAC address on R11, I've got the last 4 is 1124. I go to R1 and I see 1124 is right here. Then I know I have to use VPLS, the pseudo port of this, so then I know I'm going to be having to forward, if I do a, I believe it's if I do a xconnect all, I'll have this guy out towards router 5 will be where I'm learning that, and then I'd have to go through and do the mapping. So if I do a show bridge domain 123, I want to do a show L2 VPN VFI VPLS name is VPLS. It's telling me where my circuit-wise where I'm able to communicate with, which means I'm learning. I know it's on router 5. I was just trying to remember the. If I do a, let's see, if I do a, there's a way to map this out. Is it XConnect? Show XConnect. Neighbor or peer. Actually, let me do it this way. If I do a show XConnect interface, and it is coming from, or is it? No, there's a show connect XConnect all detail. Here, this is what I'm looking for right here. So I know it's coming from this guy, so I'd have to go and map it to the remote label. So do a show show MPLS forwarding table labels 34, and then I know I'm pointing towards 34, and if I was to do detail, it's going to tell me to go out towards, in this particular case, it's not going to show me anything because it's a layer 2 circuit, but if I was to come in here and do forwarding table for 192.168.1.5, I have a couple ways of getting there. If I do a show MPLS forwarding table, I have 33 is here, which gets me to, let's see here. I'm sorry, those are TE tunnels. That's a bad example. But I would then know how to map to the remote side, and then I'd be able to just punch it over a layer 2 circuit, and away I would go. So it all does work out. The EIGRP adjacency is up and running the way that it needs to be, and all is well. So at this point in time, everything's working. But I wanted you guys to understand that the way it's from a logical construct perspective, you go underneath, you create a vSwitch. You, in this particular case here on this vSwitch, if I go to properties and I go to edit, I am on security. I use promiscuous mode. It's set to accept, and then I specify cancel. And then on here, I specify all 4095 VLANs. So to do that, I would go to here and I would say network, or is it network adapters, or is it edit? I believe it is when you configure it, you specify edit. Yeah, right here. So you come down here and you just specify all 4095 VLANs. Click OK, and then that would just basically turn this into a big trunk link. And then from there, you'd be able to get your communication back and forth. So that's basically how you would get that situation under control. And from there, you'd be able to go ahead and do all your layer 2 VPN. Because then what you're doing is you're connecting on a per logical VNIC main interface. You are putting that interface into its own broadcast domain. And as long as you have another router on the remote end that can do that as well, you're in good shape. And that's how you get the layer 2 circuitry to work. All works out pretty well. And now that I've actually done that, I had a problem with some layer 2 problems here. So let me, since I've got you guys here, and I think I might have just figured out my problem. If we go to 5 and 6, I just come in here and do a show run, or show IP interface brief. I had a multi-point pseudo wire configured. So gig 2 show run interface gig 2. Okay, he's good to go on 5, but that's on gig 2 going that way. Where was my pseudo wire going? We do a show run section L2 VPN. I have my EVPL going out gig 1. Okay, that's why that was giving me a problem. So what I would have to do here in this particular case if I wanted to do a multi-segment pseudowire, I would have to go to, let me just do this real quick while I've got you guys still here. On R5, let's go find R5 real quick. He is down here. Let's say for on R5, we've got our main interface here, and then we've got the connection going out to R5 is connecting down to R13 on this connection here. That's where this comes into play. Gig 2 is in that configuration, so we're good to go there for the layer 2 VPN. So we can come down here. I don't have a R5 to R6 connection, so let me go ahead and just create that real quick. We cancel this out, go back to the configuration, and click on Add Networking. It's a virtual machine port group, and then we're going to say a new vSwitch, and we're going to specify here the network label is going to be R5_R6, and click Next and Finish. So now we've created that. We're going to go to R5, and I'm going to say Edit Settings. I'm going to go here to this guy and say R5R6, R5R6, and then same thing with 6 here, R5R6. Physically it doesn't matter what the connection coming in is, as long as it matches on. There you got at least 2 interfaces in the same connection. And then we're going to go back to here, and this last one all the way at the bottom here. We're going to go to Properties. We're going to go to this guy here. We're going to edit it. All 4095 VLANs, and then the security mode is going to be Accept. Click OK there, close that guy out. So now what we're going to do is go back to our configuration here, and then on here I'm going to change this configuration. I'm going to go to say do show run interface gig 1 or gig 1, and I'm going to specify interface gig 1 no and pull this guy out. I do not want that set up that way. Okay, so deleting the so it deleted that, so I'm going to go to interface gig. In this particular case I have to go to gig 3, right? Gig 3 is what I have it set up on this side for. Yeah, gig 3. Pull this guy back up, and on interface gig 3, service instance 1500 Ethernet, or 1500 I should say, 1500 Ethernet, and then we're going to specify encapsulation.1q 1500, and that'll get that going. So do show run section L2 VPN, go underneath this guy right here, and say a member interface, remember gig 3 service instance is, and the service instance number is 1500. And I'm going to say no shut that. I'm going to do the same thing on R6, but this will be gig 2. So if we do a show IP interface brief, gig 2 is shut down. So I'll say config t interface gig 2 no shut. I have to just double check on R5 that that's the same configuration too. Interface gig on here. Do show IP interface brief. Make sure gig 3 is up. Interface gig 3 no shut. Bring that up. And then on the remote side, I have to go to let me pull up the topology real quick. You're seeing me configure something on the fly. I realized the error of my way was something, so I'm fixing it at the moment. So we're going to go over here to gig 1 or router 1, show IP interface brief, and we do have the let's see, the show run section L2 VPN. Okay, so I have to move this over, so I'll go to config t, I'll type in interface gig 2 service instance 1500 Ethernet. The encapsulation .1q is 1500. We're going to exit out here and type in, go to right here, and we're going to specify that this is no longer this interface, so we're going to pull this guy out. Make this gig 2, and then, whoop, pull that out, and we're going to say no shutdown. Get that guy going. 1500, do show run section L2 VPN. Okay, so that guy's in good shape. Let's go to R6. Do show run section L2 VPN. We'll pull this guy. Well, we have to go to interface. Let's do show run. I'll move my keyboard over. Do show run interface gig 1. And then we're going to go to gig 1. And then we're going to specify, pull this guy out, say no service instance. Interface gig. Notice how the LDP adjacency went down for that connection. No big deal. We're going to say that interface gig do show IP interface brief. Interface gig 2 is no shut. So interface gig 2 service instance is 1500 Ethernet. Encapsulation .1q is Ethernet or 1500. We're going to say do show run section L2 VPN. And then underneath here, we're going to specify no shut. And then the member of gig 3 service instance 1500 Ethernet. 1500 gig 3 service instance gigabit 3 service instance 1500 do show run interface. Oh, you know what? I need to type in gig 2. There we go. And then we had that in place. So do show run section L2 VPN. Beautiful. That's coming up nicely. And then we're going to go to R7. Let's do this on R7 real quick. And we're going to say do go to show run section L2 VPN. And underneath do show IP interface brief. We have to do this on R7 to R15. And we'll take care of that in just a moment. But I'm going to have to specify do show run interface gig 1 and pull this out again. This was a misconfiguration on my part. I was not paying attention when I was doing the configuration. Interface gig 2, no shut. And then we'll type in service instance 1500 Ethernet, encapsulation .1q, and then 1500. And then we're going to go, and that will be the extent of that configuration on this guy. So do show run section L2 VPN. We're going to go back to here. We're going to say no shut. And then we're going to say member gig 2 service instance 1500. That'll rebuild that. And then now that I've got that in play, I'll be able to go down to R15 and say show IP interface brief. Config T interface gig 2 no shut. Interface gig 2 dot 1500 encapsulation .1q 1500, and then I will be able to go and type in no interface gig 1.1500. That'll take care of that problem. So I'll say that the IP address here was 15. IP address of 15.0.0.15/24. So do show run section EIGRP. Let's see. Do show IP interface brief. Interface gig 2.15. Actually, router EIGRP 15. IP address of 15.0.0.0, 0.0.0.255. Oops. Network. What was I doing? So we've got that in place. So now I've just got to go back to here. And I've got to go back to my configuration and see if there is a R7 to R15 one created. I don't see one. Oh, right here, R7 to R15. Beautiful. So now I gotta just go to R7, which is right here, and edit settings. And then on R7, let me just double check the IP address on this side. I think it was gig 2. Gig 2 it is. So I'll say on gig 2, R7, R15, right there. Click OK. So that'll be in place now. So now I'll be able to go back to our topology, pull back up secure CRT, and then on 15, when I go back through my configuration here, it's a little bit, I know it's kind of shotgunned, but if I do, let me just double check to make sure everything is back up and running. So that should be all squared away. And then R11, show IP interface brief. And there's our problem. So config T, no interface, this guy, no interface. We'll type in interface gig 2.1500, encapsulation .1q 1500, IP address of 15.0.0.11/24, do show run section EIGRP, router EIGRP 15, network of 15.0.0.0/24, and if I've done my job correctly, momentarily we should get an EIGRP adjacency. Let me just go back over on this side and say show xconnect all, and we have it's up and up to router 5, which is good. 5 is coming down here and do a show xconnect all. That's up. The Ethernet VLAN, it's an attachment circuit. So we're going to do a go to 6. Because I've got R5 gig 3 and R6 do show IP or show IP interface do show IP interface brief. Gig 2 on this side. Just double check that I've got that set up correctly. That's going to be the sticking point. So we need to go to R5. R5 is going to be edit settings. This guy will be correct. So R5, R6 on that connection. And then on R6, this will be gig 2. Beautiful. So now that I've got that situated, let me go back over to our topology. I got too many windows open. So that goes well there, and we should have that good. So on R6, we'll do a show xconnect all. I do have one. Okay, it's down to R7. Okay, so let me go to R7 and see why it's down. So do show run section L2 VPN. Okay, so this is where our problem is going to be. So show IP interface brief, and that is okay. Oh, there's the adjacency. It just took forever for it to come up. So now we've got our adjacency show xconnect all. We have an adjacency, so we go over to R11, and voila, there's our adjacency up over for EIGRP. So if we come down here and do a show IP BGP, we still have our BGP configuration going. If we go do a show IP EIGRP neighbors, we have an adjacency for L2 VPN right here. We have an adjacency for multi-segment pseudo-wire. Now this multi-segment pseudo-wire is jumping from R1 to R5, R5 to R6, and R6 to R7. So now here's the thing. If I go and I do a show IP route EIGRP, I'm only seeing that connection. So let me go up here really quick and do a do show IP interface brief. And I'm going to say interface loopback, we'll say 1501, IP address of 172.16.15.11/24. And I type in router EIGRP 15 and network of 172.16.15.0/24. I type in do show run section EIGRP, I'll just copy and paste this config right here over to R15. I'll say, we see the adjacency come up, so we know we have communication. So we'll type in interface loopback 1501, IP address of 172.16. Let's say 101. What did I say? Did I say 15 on this side? I did say 15. And I'll say 11 on this side, on 15 side. So I'll say 11.15/24. And I'll type in, I'll just copy and paste this in, but I'll switch this over to be 11. So now that we've got that situated, now 11 R1, this guy here should be show IP route EIGRP. We are learning the 11 network over this connection. So if I do a trace route to 172.16.11.15 numerically, it jumps right across, even though it's technically inter-autonomous system layer 2 VPN that is point-to-point. So that is basically how you would do that. So I have inter-autonomous system layer 2 VPN. I've shown you both point-to-multi-point, well in this case here, multi-point to multi-point, intra-autonomous system, and I've shown you point-to-point inter-autonomous system layer 2 VPN. And all you're doing is manipulating the V-switches. So it does work, 100% it works, and I've proven that. So that's basically how you would go about doing that, and you're using on R1, you're doing a show run interface gig 2. You're just using service instances to multiplex the the main interface. So if you're using .1q or gig 2.123 and .1q 1500, you're using a service instance to specify the VLAN. Now we're doing just .1q. We're not doing Q and Q. We're not doing, we're not doing anything fancy with it. But that's basically how you would go about doing this, guys. Pretty straightforward stuff. I'm having a ton of fun with the Layer 2 VPN things. You guys take it easy, and until next time, we'll catch you later.